Hello and welcome on this incredibly humid day in Ryde on the Isle of Wight. It's kind of dripping already. Welcome to this David Icke videocast and podcast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, of course, the news in Britain has been dominated day after day by the referendum campaign to stay in or leave the EU. And having watched the tidal wave of lies and attempts to frighten the public into staying in the EU because of all the consequences of coming out, like freedom, it's amazing that the opinion polls currently are so close, with the Leave campaign in some polls now going into the lead. We've had the entire system virtually pushing the case for the EU. And there is no case for the EU when you break it down and you look at the consequences for people, freedom, small, medium-sized business. It's all about the giant corporations, the EU. When you look at the fine detail of our lives that is increasingly dictated by unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, there is no case for the EU. So the only way they think they can do it is to frighten people into staying in out of concern about the consequences of coming out. And we've had this, as I'm just recording this now, we've had this story about this Conservative MP, Sarah Wollaston, who has quit the campaign to leave the EU and will vote for Remain instead, she told the BBC, who I'm sure will be delighted to hear it. Dr. Wollaston, chairman of the Health Select Committee, said Vote Leave's claim that Brexit would free up £350 million a week for the NHS simply isn't true. And so she's saying, as a result of not agreeing with what's being said there, that she's going to move to the other side and vote to stay in. The consensus now is there would be a huge economic shock if we voted to leave. In other words, she's bought the lie. Giving her the benefit of the doubt, she's bought the lie about the consequences of coming out compared with the catastrophic economic consequences of actually staying in. Greece, I rest my case. So her logic is that, having looked at all the arguments over leaving the EU or staying in, she decided that leave was best. So then suddenly, because of one thing she didn't agree with, she's now moving over to the Stay In campaign, which has dramatically different consequences for Britain than if we come out. She's also saying that it's because of a lie about the NHS. So in response to that, she's going over to the Stay In campaign, which has been lying through its teeth and its dentures since day one to frighten people into staying in. It is an extraordinary example of the mental gymnastics that it takes to think that being controlled and dictated to by unelected bureaucrats with a hidden agenda is in any way even beginning to be sensible in terms of the way this country is governed and ruled. And like I say, it's amazing that anyone is voting to leave, given the incredible fear campaign to make them stay in. But of course, what has happened is people, never mind what the politicians say, people have had decades and decades of experience in their own lives and their own businesses and their own jobs of what it means to have the EU bureaucrats dictating everything. And so they are sensibly saying, we've got a chance to get out, let's get out. But while it's incredible how many people are wanting to leave in the circumstances of this campaign, if it wasn't for public ignorance, systematic public ignorance, of the real agenda and direction and desired outcome of this EU project, people weren't ignorant of what it's really about, there would be hardly anybody, apart from the elite and the system-serving, self-serving elite, who would be voting to stay in. I've been writing, researching, and tracking the EU for decades, looking at its history, looking where it came from, looking where it wants to go. And from the start, provably, the idea was always to create a Europe-wide, centralized, bureaucratic, beyond democracy superstate, eventually breaking countries up into regions and transforming the face of Europe into a fascist-stroke communist dictatorship. We were sold at the start a free trade area because that's all that people would have accepted. If you'd have told the countries of Europe, after fighting the Nazis to stop them creating a European superstate, that you want to do that yourself, well, you wouldn't have got far. So you don't tell them what you're really doing, you tell them what they'll find acceptable in enough numbers. So the whole idea was, we'll sell them a free trade area, and then step by step, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, we'll move them towards what we planned all along. And so ever since the EU was created as the European Economic Community, the common market, step by step by step, more and more power has been taken to the centre and more power taken from national parliaments, ending, deleting, step by step, national sovereignty in Europe. Now, if people think it's bad now, this is where we are now. This is not where we're supposed to end. The idea is to take this incessant centralization of power, dictating all areas of European life, individually and collectively, deeper and deeper and deeper into this tyranny that's been planned from the start. And let's not kid ourselves that a lot of stuff has been held back purposely until this referendum is over, so as not to frighten the horses and have British people going, whoa, if that's coming, we're out. So I hear these people. Some know they're lying. Others are so ignorant they bought it. I hear politicians say, we ought to stay in and reform the EU from within, like it's ever happened before. The idea is not to allow the EU to be reformed, i.e. power taken from the centre in any way. It's to focus it and concentrate it even more at the centre. The idea is to pull more and more countries in with open borders across Europe, so that there is no control whatsoever by national governments of how many people from the EU pour into their country and overwhelm their public services, which is what's happening now. Plus all the other migration from outside the EU, the public services are collapsing. So that's what they plan. Not more of the same, but a dramatic increase on more of the same. And corporations, giant corporations, have had handed to them in the creation of the EU, not least because the same force controlling the corporations controls the EU and created it and advanced it to where it is now. The EU to corporations is it's almost like a gigantic orgasmic creation, because before corporations, to get what they want in each country by changing the laws and policies to benefit them, of course goes on all the time, they had to work in each individual country with each individual government to get those laws changed. Now, thanks to the EU, they have a one-stop shop. All they've got to do is get policy changed by the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, and instantly every country in Europe becomes subject to those law changes that suit the corporations. This is why you can see on the internet a documentary about how corporations control the EU and how around the European Commission in Brussels, where the bureaucrats are, is like this explosion of offices for lobbying organizations working for giant corporations. And like I say, this is not meant to stay where it is now. It's meant to go much, much more extreme to reach their goal that they set out from the start to achieve, of a totally centralized European dictatorship. And so we have this negotiation going on, negotiation it says here, between the EU, the corporations, and America, over this trade agreement called TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And if they get what they want, it will mean that corporations can overturn or create or cause to happen massive fines for governments for changing the law or introducing legislation, maybe for the benefit of the environment, maybe for the benefit of people, maybe for the benefit of fairness, it does happen occasionally, of the people. But they would face corporate type courts under this trade agreement if a corporation complained to the court that those new laws, which may be, like I say, of great benefit to people, of great benefit to the environment, could affect their future profits. In other words, corporations would openly control governments instead of behind the scenes doing it now, and the ability to control governments will be massively advanced. Now note, this TTIP trade agreement is between the EU and the United States. If we come out, bye-bye TTIP. And, by the way, Sarah Wollaston, when you're changing sides because of something you don't agree with, said about the NHS, the corporations will make a case, supported by the EU, if this trade agreement goes through, that the National Health Service, the NHS, is affecting future profits of privatized corporations that deal in healthcare. It will be the end of the NHS And this government, Cameron's government, knows it. That's why they're running it down and trying to make it as inefficient and chaotic as possible to dilute public challenge and outrage when they start this privatization process. Oh, well, it can't be any worse privatized than it was run by the government. That's the psychological manipulation that we're seeing all the time. So when you realize that there is a hidden hand, like a spider's web, and people like top politicians and financial organizations like central banks and the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the European Central Bank, the European Union, the banking system, they're all attached an answer to this web. It's when you've done the research that I have over the last more than a quarter of a century, it's a head shaker every day when you turn the news on. You see Obama come out, webman. You see Merkel come out, a web woman. You see the IMF come out. You see the Bank of England come out. All these expressions of this web that answer to the web, and the European Union is massively part of the web, they all come out apparently spontaneously, apparently just saying what they think is best for people, telling us to stay in the EU, which is what the web wants. They're terrified of Britain coming out, because the idea is to pull more and more countries in and expand this superstate tyranny. Once one comes out, it's not just vast numbers of British people who are sick of the EU. Vast numbers of people across the EU are sick of the EU. And the pressure will be to start breaking up this tyrannical edifice. They're terrified. That's why they're throwing everything. I'm waiting for the claim that if we come out, Godzilla will attack London the next morning. It's unbelievable, but this is what's happening. And so you have the Stay In campaign led by David Cameron and George Osborne. And this elite, not least the House of Rothschild, they have little pockets put into their shirts about here on either side, and Cameron goes in one and Osborne goes in the other. So when they open their mouths, it is this elite, this web talking. But then you look at this, and I have to say, from my point of view, this grotesque sight of the Labour opposition party, along with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party and the unions, all lining up shoulder to shoulder with these pocket people, Cameron and Osborne, to press people to stay in the European Union. We have Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, who has been against the EU all his political career, now standing up and trying to make a case for it, including, sits back in amazement, shakes head, takes breath, that they would reform it from within. These are organisations that's supposed to, in some way, stand for fairness and justice and looking after the people who are victims of the system rather than running it. And they are campaigning with these right-wing zealots to stay in a centralised, undemocratic, bureaucratic superstate that is by the day deleting more and more freedoms from the people they allegedly represent. And I've said in previous videocasts, the number of organisations that are campaigning to stay in who are on the EU payroll is fantastic. We have a situation where a number of people I've come across have said that they don't like the EU. They would really like to be outside, but they fear that if we come out, then the right wing, as it's perceived, the postage stamp, which they're all sitting on, that postage stamp political consensus currently run by the Conservative Party would push on with austerity and injustice, unfettered, unstopped. A very important point to make here. The hidden hand that controls the Conservative Party in Britain and is pushing this austerity agenda is the same hidden hand that created, never mind controls, the EU. Thus, look at what the EU has done economically to Greece. It has destroyed it. It has got it into a situation where it's in enormous debt, a debt on money called credit that has never, does not, and will never exist. And as a result of that agreement, they have been asset stripped of state assets because the deal was, we'll give you this money that doesn't exist, that you can never pay back, and you will sell your assets basically for cents on the dollar to corporations, which is what's happened. And the idea of the EU control system is to asset strip the entire continent. So if anyone thinks that at least the EU will protect us from the extremes of the Conservative Party in Britain, well, forget it. That's not what the game is. We have Nicola Sturgeon, this left-wing kind of firebrand lady, who wants Scotland to come out of the United Kingdom and be an independent country within the European Union. An independent country within the European Union. If ever a contradiction in terms has ever been articulated, that is it. And she is vehemently campaigning to stay in the EU. Don't be controlled by London. Be controlled by Brussels. Oh my God. Talk about turkeys voting for Christmas. And then we have business, small business, medium-sized business, that is not a giant corporation. And they have been complaining, quite rightly, at the devastating effect on their businesses and ability to function of the deluge, the constant deluge of directives and new laws and regulations from the European Union. There's a reason for this. Why would an organization that cares about business and wants business to flourish crush them constantly with more and more red tape and bureaucracy, which has driven many of them out of business? Why would they? They wouldn't, because that's not the idea. The idea of making it harder and harder and harder to function as a small and medium-sized business, even some might be called, bigger business, is because the whole agenda is that eventually everything will be done by giant corporations, and there will be no small and medium size and less than giant corporation businesses. So once again, if you are involved in a business that is not a giant corporation and you're voting to stay in, right? Well, you too are turkeys voting for Christmas and Thanksgiving and any other appropriate analogy. Think what would happen if we came out and took control of our own country. We could take control of our borders so that we weren't seeing public services collapsing through sheer numbers. We could take control of our fishing grounds, which we gave away, Ted Heath gave away when he negotiated, the Prime Minister at the time, who negotiated us into this prison state. He gave away our fishing grounds in an island nation, and what has happened? It's destroyed the British fishing industry and many other things he gave away. And decades later, when he was asked on a BBC programme, did you know when you were negotiating entry into the common market, just a free trade area, nothing to worry about, that you were agreeing to political union at the time? He said, yes, of course. What he told the people at the time that we went in the early 1970s, was that he wasn't agreeing to political union, it was just a free trade area. And so when this MP, Sarah Wollaston, is talking about lies and then goes over to the Stay In campaign, the EU project has been based on lies, criminal, staggering levels of mendacity from start to now. And it's still going on in this campaign. And I emphasize again, this is not where it's meant to end. This is where we are now. They're now trying to stop coming out, but I've been writing about this since the 1990s, that this was the agenda of the EU. They're trying to stop coming out the fact that they are manipulating into place, as we speak, a European army. They want a European army and a European police force that overrides national sovereignty. And in all areas of our lives, they want to take complete control, including over the internet, what we can do on the internet, what we can't do on the internet. Already, the EU has impacted massively on internet freedom. And once again, that's nowhere near where they want to go. So ignorance is a devastating human trait, and it's systematic. The idea is to keep everyone ignorant of what's really happening, so what's really happening can go about its business unchallenged, unexposed, unseen. And I would say this, instead of listening to politicians and corporate CEOs and all these other system people before deciding what to do in this referendum on June 23rd, do your own research. People that have been with my work over the years do that. But those that haven't, do your own research into the history, the background of the European Union and what its real agenda is. It's in my books, it's in videos that I've done on the internet, and other documentaries are there from other people who've come up with the truth about the European Union. Get informed, and if you do, there's no way you will vote to stay in on June the 23rd. No way. We'll move on to other things. Now, what shall we start with? Bilderberg Group. God, look at me. Bloody melting. So hot here today. Bilderberg Group. Meeting in Germany. This is a report from Infowars, and it's got the list here, quite a long list, all these pages, of the attendees. And it's the usual mix that the Bilderberg Group deals with every year. The Bilderberg Group was officially launched in 1954 at the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Holland. That's why it gets its name. And for a long time, it operated in secret. I remember would have been in the 1990s. I went to a Bilderberg location in Switzerland because I was actually staying with somebody about 2 hours down the road, synchronistically. And I drove up, and the day before, or 2 days before, I went up to the hotels, massive hotels on this kind of mountain, Mercedes everywhere, and they were putting all the barriers up, and all the people that, in the suits with their identification were walking around, and then I went back on the last day of the actual meeting, and then I couldn't even get on the mountain. We turned off the main road to go up the road I went before, and there was the Swiss police at the bottom of the mountain stopping anyone going up there. And I asked the Swiss policeman in this big orange jacket he had on what was going on, playing the idiot. And he genuinely had no idea. All he'd been told was that there was this meeting going on, and he had to stop people coming up the road. This is how compartmentalization works. Anyway, at that time, very few people, very, very few people, only a handful really, had ever heard of the Bilderberg Group or knew what it was all about. And as the years have passed and researchers have communicated the background to the Bilderberg Group, now it's much more well known, compared with then widely known, that the Bilderberg Group exists. And it's what I call a cusp organization. If you get the spider in the center and you come out from the spider, the strands are secret societies, very secret organizations if you're close to the spider. And then you meet a point as you come out from the spider in the web, these cusp organizations where, if you like, the hidden meets the seen. That's when you're talking about the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, etc. And then you come through the cusp organizations into the organizations that we see: governments, government agencies, banks, etc. And these cusp organizations, their role is to take the agenda and the policies of the agenda and the direction of society they're meant to go, and filter them out through the organizations in the scene, so they become changes in policy and changes in legislation. So that's the kind of context of the Bilderberg Group. And this headline, this Infowars report, Bilderberg 2016 to talk Trump, riots, migrants, and Brexit. They'll be talking Brexit because they're terrified that Britain will come out because of the domino effect that could start. And it goes on. The secretive Bilderberg Group, which is set to meet in Dresden, Germany later this week, will discuss how to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president, the possibility of mass riots as a result of wealth inequality, which they created, or helped to create, the migrant crisis, as well as the United Kingdom's vote on leaving the European Union. The influential meeting of bankers, politicians, media heads, and business moguls has released its official participant list and agenda for 2016. Now, as they say, in my day, where the kind of times I was talking about a few minutes ago, then someone had to leak the attendee list. Now it's kind of released because, well, the secrecy in terms of its existence is over. Now they have to try to convince people that well, it's just a meeting of people. It's no big conspiracy, which of course it's part of a massive global conspiracy. It goes on, as per usual, the list of topics to be discussed is extremely vague. Well, they're not going to tell us the detail of what they're discussing. Otherwise, we'd say, hold on, there's a pattern here. Current events, China, Europe, migration, growth, reform, vision, unity. Middle East, Russia. Well, as I've been saying all these years, China and Russia are in the gun sights of this global network because they want a third world war involving the West and Russia, China. The Middle East speaks for itself. They want to tear it asunder. They will continue to do. They've already done it. The others in the list: US political landscape, economy, growth, debt reform, cybersecurity, that means censoring the internet, geopolitics of energy and commodity prices, precariat and middle class. Precariat refers to people who are struggling, in austerity, and precariat in a precarious state. And they're in a precarious state because the people that control the internet, or the Bilderberg group, rather, have brought about this whole austerity program, which has created the precariat on the scale we see today. And technical innovation, well, that's going to be the transhumanist agenda, no doubt. Anyway, the story goes on. However, we can easily infer from the agenda and some of the names on the participant list what the group will be discussing in more detail. The attendance of anti-Trump Senator Lindsey Graham, brackets, absolute bag carrier of extraordinary proportions and extremes for Israel, is an obvious sign that Bilderberg will be scheming on how to prevent Trump from defeating Bilderberg's chosen candidate, Hillary Clinton. I agree that Clinton is the chosen candidate, but the idea that Trump won't be controlled as president by the same people is ridiculous. And I'm very surprised that so much of the alternative media, particularly in the United States, has bought this nonsense, that he's independent. As we reported during last year's conference, Bilderberg was confident that Clinton could shake off her challengers. But Trump's self-funded campaign, well, he says it is, and his public opposition to globalism and internationalist trade deals like NAFTA has shocked the Bilderberg elitists. Well, when Trump opens his mouth and says things, it should be taken with the understanding that he has said so much so often, which he has then contradicted by saying the opposite a little way down the road. I mean, he will say what is necessary to get the outcome he wants. That's how he works in business. That's how he works in what he's doing now. Therefore, if it's something else further down the road, contradicting what's been said here, that will get him what he wants, then that's what he will do. Honestly, the naivety of it sometimes. Bilderberg will obviously be discussing Brexit, Britain referendum vote to leave the EU, because it threatens the future of the European Union federal superstate that was the brainchild of Bilderberg in the first place. Well, it was the brainchild of people before Bilderberg, but it's absolutely right that Bilderberg, this group and grouping, has been massively involved in the developing of the European superstate and the advancing of it, and the introduction of the euro, the single currency, which is a stepping stone to a world no cash, only electronic money, single currency. The inclusion of the precariat and middle class on the list means that the powerful lobby group will be ruminating on how they can exploit and manage the inevitability of more riots and civil unrest in the West, a topic that elitists were also concerned about at the 2015 Davos Economic Summit. It's another where the same crowd basically meet, another web organization. Precariat describes those who are struggling to survive in today's economy and who have no long-term wage security. Studies have shown that wealth inequality increases the likelihood of mass social disorder. Well, of course, that is an obvious cause and effect, but what they want is to cause people to riot and have upheavals in response to the crushing austerity they're put under, and then that justifies more police state and an advancement of the police state to protect the rest of the public from the rioters, the extremists, and that's why, and I go into this in the World Tour events. That's why we have to respond to this with streetwiseness and not just, riot and what have you, because we need some intelligence on how they work and how they manipulate events to make it as difficult as possible for them to justify what they want to do. Therefore, you don't have to be violent, you don't have to riot to bring the system down. You don't. The flooding of Europe with third world migrants, it says, a process which has driven European voters into the arms of nationalist parties that typically oppose Bilderberg's wider agenda, will also be a key topic of discussion. And, that's also part of this whole demolition of countries in Europe and European culture, as I've talked about before, by this mass migration that is being systematically allowed to happen. Other interesting names on the attendee list include Richard Engel, NBC News' chief foreign correspondent, and you won't hear him discussing or reporting what's gone on at the meeting that he's attended. Almost certainly won't even mention he's been there. The article says, normally a semi-secret meeting of over 100 of the most powerful people on the planet would be a monumental news scoop, but don't expect Engel to utter a word. Bilderberg operates, it says, under Chatham House rules, which means that none of the participants are able to reveal any comments made during the conference. And Chatham House refers to an organisation called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which is based at Chatham House in London, and that's another one of this web around a secret society in Britain called the Round Table. The first head was Cecil Rhodes, the Rothschild frontman, who died in 1902. And this Round Table secret society then created the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, etc., and the Club of Rome in the 1960s, whose mission is to use the environment to transform society, and that's where the global warming hoax came out of. Although it was reported in the German media that German Chancellor Angela Merkel owned lock, stock and barrel down to her DNA by this web, which is why she opened the door to mass immigration, into Germany, would attend this year's conference, but her name doesn't appear on the list. However, it is a common practice for Bilderberg to omit names from the official list if the individual's attendance is politically sensitive. I mean, Clinton's turned up to these events, which don't be on the list. So let's go through this participant list to give you a feel for the kind of areas that are covered. There's the chairman of the supervisory board of Deutsche Bank. Banking and finance is massively involved in the Bilderberg Group. Magdalena Andersson from Sweden, Minister of Finance. Anne Applebaum, columnist, Washington Post, and director of the Transitions Forum. Again, she won't be reporting the truth about what happened. Jose Barroso, former president of the European Commission, who was basically the leading bureaucrat for so many years, driving this EU agenda that I talked about today. There's the CEO of Royal Dutch Shell, the executive chairman of Santander Bank, former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Philip M. Breedlove, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Norway, William J. Burns, president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in America. That was the organization that was exposed by a congressional investigation in the 1950s, and was shown that the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace was actually manipulating war. Inverted world, Orwellian inversion. If you read And the Truth Shall Set You Free, I go into that whole story. The Senior Director, European Affairs of the Aspen Institute, Aspen, Colorado, is another web organization, which is a coordinating organization which gets these elite players together to agree on a common direction. The Netherlands Minister for the Environment, Robert Dudley, Group Chief Executive of British Petroleum, BP, the Group Chairman of HSBC Bank, Senator Lindsey Graham. When Israel says jump, Lindsey Graham lands on the moon. Demis Hassabis, co-founder of and CEO of DeepMind. That takes us into the transhumanist agenda that I go into in Phantom Self and in the World Tour events. John Kerr, Deputy Chairman, Scottish Power, major energy company in Britain. Oh, here we go. Never misses one. Henry Kissinger, Chairman, Kissinger Associates, one of the great global manipulators and war criminals of modern times. And although he's in his 90s now, because he gets the same treatment we do, of course, he's still manipulating away and at the Bilderberg Group yet again. Then there's this guy, Henry Kravis, co-chairman and co-CEO of Coburg, Kravis, Roberts and Company. Now, I've written about this guy and this KKR company. It's an asset stripper, basically. It takes over companies and asset strips them. And he and his wife are fundamentally involved in this whole web I'm talking about. In fact, she's here, Marie-Josie Kravis, Senior Fellow of the Hudson Institute. They're involved in many of these groups, and Henry Kravis, very, very close friend of the monumental paedophile Father George Bush. Christine Lagarde, Managing Director, International Monetary Fund, currently involved in a case on trial involving corruption. And she is the person who came out, another web person, IMF, web organization, to say it will be terrible if Britain left the EU because of all these dire consequences. You know, oh, go and give evidence, mate, will you? Then we have the German Minister of Defense. We have columnist Meghan McArdle from Bloomberg View. And I'm sure articles will come out through these so-called journalists afterwards, which will be based on Bilderberg agendas. Charles Michel, Belgian Prime Minister, Editor-in-Chief of Bloomberg. They can travel together. It'll be convenient, won't it? Editor-in-Chief of The Economist magazine in Britain, which is connected to the Rothschilds. Turns up a lot in these Bilderberg meetings. The Canadian Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau, Charles A. Murray, a W. H. Brady scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. American Enterprise Institute is involved in the so-called neocon network in America that was behind the whole 9/11 invade Afghanistan, invade Iraq scenario. The King of the Netherlands, the House of Orange in the Netherlands, the Dutch royal family, have been involved in the Bilderberg Group since the start. They turn up all the time. There was involvement by the Dutch royal family in the very creation of it through Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was a German. He was in the SS during the war, who married into the Dutch royal family. And he was one of the prime creators, and indeed the first head of the Bilderberg Group from the start. Then we have the Minister of Finance for Ireland. We have Peggy Noonan, author, columnist, the Wall Street Journal. We have Michael O'Leary, Ryanair CEO. I could fly himself there. That's good. That's how convenient. And then we have David Petraeus. David Petraeus, he's now chairman of the KKR Global Institute, see KKR Kravis that I've just talked about. Now, David Petraeus was a big general in Afghanistan when all that was going on, and then he became head of the CIA. But then it came out that he revealed something to a mistress, and he stood down. But it was David Petraeus who talked about, as head of the CIA, who talked about the fact that they were going to are introducing something called the Internet of Things, where everything is connected to the Internet. And because of that, who controls the Internet, and this network does, will be able to control and keep surveillance on everything and everyone connected to the Internet. I go into this in Phantom Self and the World Tour events in some detail. Very, very, very important to know what's going on in relation to that. Then we have the Danish Minister of Justice. Then we have Robert E. Rubin, co-chair of the Council on Foreign Relations. There you go, Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations are in the same network. And Robert E. Rubin was fundamentally involved in the manipulation that led to the financial crash in 2008 when he was involved in the Clinton administration. Then we have the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. We have the Minister of Finance from Germany. And then, here we go. We're into the transhumanist agenda, which is on their kind of list, although hidden away in vague language. Eric Schmidt, Executive Chairman, Alphabet, Inc. To you and me, that's Google. Google is a monster. And it's not just involved in the internet as a search engine, so it can manipulate what people see and keep surveillance on people. It is also massively into robotics and the whole transhumanist agenda, big time. So to hide, because Google is such a well-known name, to hide the extent of what Google is doing, they have relatively recently changed the name of much of the company to Alphabet. And Eric Schmidt is so connected and is such a vehicle for this web. It's breathtaking. Then we have the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. That's another one of these organizations in the web where they coordinate action between apparently unconnected people. We have the deputy prime minister of Turkey. Of course, Turkey is very much involved in supporting and supplying the US-created ISIL, Islamic State operation in the Middle East. The professor for economics and public finance at the University of Munich. Again, a big financial connection to all of this, not just in banks, but in the way that financial policy is influenced. Then we have Jacob Wallenberg from Sweden, chairman of Investor AB. Now, the Wallenbergs in Sweden are known as the Swedish Rothschilds. Say no more, no wonder he's there. Then we have the professor of economics at the University of Mainz, and Martin Wolf, chief economics commentator of the British financial newspaper, the Financial Times. So what happens is, obviously, there are people that are Bilderberg stalwarts that are behind it all the time. People like Kissinger, David Rockefeller, till he became ill, or too ill to travel to these things. And then you have the people who are brought in, regulars, and then you have people who are brought in maybe for one or two because there's something they can introduce that they need, that Bilderberg needs their support for, so they bring them into the fold. And the idea is to create a consensus across countries and across, if you like, institutions like banks and politics and media that push the world society into the desired direction. Okay, let's cross the Atlantic now. Hillary comes out as a war candidate. This is an article in Counterpunch. On June the 2nd, a few days before the California primary, Hillary Clinton gave up trying to compete with Bernie Sanders on domestic policy. Instead, she zeroed in on the soft target of Donald Trump's most bizarre rants in order to present herself as experienced and reasonable. Reasonable is the last word you would ever use for Hillary Clinton. Evidently taking her Democratic Party nomination for granted, she is positioning herself as the perfect candidate for hawkish Republicans. Choosing to speak in San Diego, home base of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, on a platform draped with 19 American flags and preceded by half an hour of military marching music. It's all manipulation. It's unbelievable. People fall for it as well. It's extraordinary. There was on the Isle of Wight, just a few miles from where I'm sitting, there's a lovely pub, and it's in a kind of a craft kind of operation. Lots of very interesting little things go on, businesses and crafts, and they have like old posters on the walls and stuff. And one of them is a poster advertising a meeting for men from the Isle of Wight to go to be persuaded to join the army to go and fight in the First World War. And on the poster it says, patriotic music will be played. That's marching bands at the Clinton events. Oh, she's America. God bless America. She's been destroying America her whole life, just wants to complete the job. Hillary Clinton was certain of finding a friendly audience for her celebration of American strength, values, and exceptionalism. Yawn. Cheered by a military audience, Hillary was already assuming the role to which she most ardently aspires, that of Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Yes, because she's a war maniac, this woman. Whenever Hillary speaks, one must look for the lies. The biggest lies in this speech were lies of omission, the article says. No mention of her support for the invasion of Iraq, no mention of the disaster she wrought in Libya, no mention of her contribution to pursuing endless death and destruction in the Middle East. But she also lied in claiming partial credit for the Iran nuclear deal, which she had tended to block, and most profoundly in presenting herself as a champion of diplomacy. As Secretary of State, she blocked diplomacy that would have prevented or ended conflict, most notoriously concerning Libya, where even senior US officers were told to cut off their contacts with Gaddafi agents seeking a peaceful compromise. Didn't want a peaceful compromise. Getting rid of Gaddafi was the whole point. The Washington Post reported prior to the speech that her campaign hopes that there are many more national security-minded Republicans and independents who would vote for her, even grudgingly, rather than see Trump win the White House. This is one of the reasons that Trump's there. It makes it easier, it's believed anyway, to get her in by dividing the Republican Party. If you remember, when her husband got in, Bill Clinton, a guy, Ross Perot, ran as a third candidate and split the Republican anti-Clinton vote. The Washington Post there we go. The Washington Post noted that the state of California's there was 2 paragraphs there starting the Washington Post's noted that the state of California's defense industry and military bases led a backdrop for her speech. Indeed, says the article, Hillary Clinton is quite simply catering to the military-industrial complex as she's been doing throughout her career. Absolutely right. She is catering to the arms industry, which needs to keep the American people scared of various threats in order to continue draining the nation's wealth into their profitable enterprises. She needs the support of military men and women who believe in all those threats invented by intellectuals in think tanks and editorial offices. So the article concludes that Hillary Clinton is the clear candidate of the war party, and she is. So was Bush, but then so was Obama. So was Father Bush. And so will be Trump, should he get in. Now, of course, it's been going on about this manipulation of the Third World War that they want, bringing into conflict the West and Russia and China. And this is an article, because this, people said to me, when Russia, Putin, announced that he was bringing planes back from Syria to Russia, people said to me, well, it's going the other way then. Well, and I said, well, no, it's not. Some planes were being returned, but it was a symbolic rather than a literal gesture, because the planes that stayed have continued to go about the business of supporting Assad by bombing raids in Syria. And this is where it's very important, if people are going to be streetwise, that they don't judge every step as at the end of a journey. It's not how it works. It's a step. And where future steps lead may be very different from where that step appears to be leading. As I pointed out at the time to these people, this is just a step. It doesn't mean anything. And here we now have a story. Russia vows air support for Syrian troops in Aleppo. See, the situation can change so fast. Russia has vowed to provide Syrian government troops with the most active air support around Aleppo, following the death of scores of people during fierce clashes with terrorists over the weekend. During a press conference held in Moscow on Monday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov added that the so-called moderate opposition groups, had been given enough time to leave the city. Washington recently asked Moscow to stop conducting airstrikes against the al-Nusra, al-Qaeda affiliate, terrorists in Syria, over fears of hitting the US-backed groups fighting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government. He said, "We believe that there was plenty of time for the normal opposition to leave the Nusra Front territories since February. Those who didn't part ways with the terrorists have only themselves to blame." Last week, the al-Qaeda-affiliated al-Nusra Front terrorist group launched an offensive against the northwestern city of Aleppo. What is happening in Aleppo and around it now, we warn the Americans about this in advance, and they know they will be actively supporting, or we will be actively supporting, the Syrian army from the air to prevent terrorists from seizing territory, Lavrov said. He added that Russia's decision had been shared with the US during a video conference. There won't be any surprises for the Americans, he said. Earlier, the Russian Defense Ministry announced that some 2,000 militants had been gathered around the city of Sheikh Massoud neighborhood, among them various terrorist groups and teams of so-called moderate opposition, so-called being the emphasis. Syrian opposition groups have on multiple occasions been accused of breaking a shaky cessation of hostilities in the country. Brokered by Moscow and Washington, the nationwide cessation of hostilities was introduced in February in a bid to facilitate dialogue between Syria's rival parties. ISIS and al-Nusra Front terrorist groups were excluded from the truce. Aleppo has been divided between government forces in the west and militants in the east since 2012, a year after the conflict broke out in Syria, thanks to the manipulation of the United States, not least an ambassador to Syria called Ford. Meanwhile, during two separate offensives, Syrian government forces backed by Russian air support and Syrian Democratic Forces backed by the US are closing in on the ISIS terrorist group's de facto capital, Raqqa. According to the so-called Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, well, it's a man living in Coventry in England. Go figure. The Russian-backed forces have reached the vicinity of Lake Assad, which lays some 50 kilometers, 30 miles west of Raqqa. The Kurdish forces have also progressed around 40 miles north of the city. On Monday, the Pentagon announced that despite regular Russian and US communications aimed at stopping the collision of fighter jets, no coordination was being carried out for ground forces. You know, it's an accident waiting to happen, isn't it? Syria has been gripped by foreign-backed militancy it blames on some regional and Western governments. According to a February report by the Syrian Center for Policy Research, the conflict in Syria has claimed the lives of over 470,000 people since March 2011. And then we have this report this week, British Special Forces operating alongside rebels in Syria. The reports of special forces crossing the border from Jordan is the latest evidence of British involvement in the fight against ISIS, reported by MEE. And, of course, they're using what they call special forces because they don't have to have agreement from Parliament to go into countries, as a fully fledged invasion would. And last year, Prime Minister David Cameron announced plans to expand the UK's Special Forces capacity as part of a $2 billion additional investment in military spending specifically aimed at tackling ISIS. And the reason that expansion of Special Forces is happening is because, for the very reason I've just said, they can do things with Special Forces they can't do legally anyway, though they do, with the fully fledged if you like, general military. And, of course, in the Middle East, you've got countries who are fighting with America and Britain, etc., who have horrendous human rights records, like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who've been massively involved in all that's gone on in Syria and Libya, etc. And here's the story. More than half of Qatar's population live in labor camps. More than half. Some 1.4 million of the country's 2.4 million population lived in camps, according to a April 2015 census released on Sunday and cited by AFP. Qatar's population has grown to more than 2.5 million since the census, reflecting the large influx of migrant workers, largely from South Asia, that have been brought in to carry out infrastructure work in the oil-rich Gulf state. In 1986, the population was just 373,000. Qatar has developed a reputation for slave labour and inhumane conditions for its workers, particularly in the run-up to the 2022 FIFA World Cup to be held in Qatar. And of course, that only happened in a country with weather, the most unsuitable weather you can imagine to play football in, thanks to the staggering levels of corruption in FIFA itself. And just last week, 11 people died in a fire at a camp near the Saudi Arabian border where workers were living. And it it goes on about the horrendous conditions that workers in these camps, where more than half the population live in Qatar, how terrible it is. But they're allies and friends in the coalition of the agenda. So no condemnation, nothing. Letters prove GCHQ bends laws to spy at will. What's the point of privacy safeguards? Now, this is something I've been saying all along. There is no point in all this, we have safeguards over people being subject to surveillance. They just ignore them. Safeguards are only there to let people think there's some kind of control of how much surveillance goes on. But there isn't. GCHQ, of course, is basically the British National Security Agency in America, and is very much connected to it. Letters between GCHQ and an official overseeing the spy agency shed new light on how Britain's eavesdroppers interpret laws to suit their surveillance efforts. The memos were obtained by campaign group Privacy International and handed to the Register today. Although the letters date from 2004, they show how the agency is willing to bend the rules, a fact that is highly relevant right now, as Parliament mulls over a new law granting fresh powers to UK spies, so-called Snoopers Charter. The fear is that if GCHQ has been flexing previous regulations to carry out blanket surveillance of innocent people, what use are any of the safeguards in the new rules, seeing that they too could be neatly sidestepped? And the emails go on to show that the person overseeing the oversight of surveillance by GCHQ was basically saying, oh, all right, yeah, you're sorry to do that, even though that shouldn't have happened, and admitting in the emails that he didn't really know what the laws were. So, oh, we've got new laws in place to protect the public. It's always a joke. Now, this is a story to do with some of the themes that I've been talking about in recent podcasts. That is children and the use of climate change to justify a transformation of society. UN adopts education plan to indoctrinate children into globalism. In other words, this world government dictatorship that I've been writing about all these years. It's the United Nations summit in Korea this week adopted a global action plan demanding a planetary education regime, Orwellian or what, to transform children around the world into social justice warriors and sustainability-minded global citizens. And this word sustainability, which is you don't take more than you can replace, it sounds good. That's why they use it. But sustainability is not what it's all about. Sustainability is an excuse to centralize the control of everything, including all resources and the use of all resources. Among other elements, that means the UN-directed global education must promote integrated development of the whole person, including the formation of their ethics, values, spirituality, the final document declared. This is a colossal global perception program. The global citizenship programs with definitions to be incorporated in curricula worldwide. See? It's because of the connections, the web, you can decide something at a global level and you can get it into, in this case, the education curricula all over the world because of the way the web works. It should indoctrinate people or children so that they understand their responsibilities to protect the planet. This is where all the whole global warming hoax comes in again. And promote what the UN and its member governments consider to be the common good. Common good means centralized, dictated society, which they decide is in the common good when it's really in the good of those that create that society. In other words, a handful, relatively, of people. The controversial action plan approved by the UN's propaganda department and a group of largely government-funded, non governmental organisations, NGOs, is in the Republic of Korea is aimed at helping the UN impose its Agenda 2030 scheme to, quote, transform the world. In fact, the title of the summit gave away the agenda: Education for Global Citizenship, Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals Together. Sustainable Development Goals, what I've just said, excuse to transform society in anything but a sustainable way. And this is the thing, education for global citizenship. This is about indoctrinating children to become global citizens in their perception, because they want to introduce a world government and bring an end to countries. That's what the EU breaking it up into regions is all about as well. It's all interconnected. So we have people not associating with being British or American or anything like that, and all the unique cultures are deleted, because what this network absolutely abhors is diversity, wants uniformity everywhere. And to create a uniform world with the world government dictating globally as the EU type organizations dictate in their area. And eventually the EU will be dictating to the regions of Europe on behalf of what starts out as policy in the world government. It's so, if you've been researching it as long as I have, it's an open bloody book. This is a story about why is there suddenly such a huge push for Mark of the Beast technology, i.e. We have technology to chip us, to track us, and externally manipulate us. Well, the answer to that question is very, very easy. It's been the agenda all along to get microchips inside people and other transhumanist technology, and for people to have things like internet IDs based on this technology, and IDs going through airports instead of passports with this technology. And here's part of the article that Tesla CEO Elon Musk, who was also creator of eBay, he insists that we're all going to have to become cyborgs someday. Oh, really? Why, pray? Elon Musk, the billionaire boss of Tesla and SpaceX, has said that humans need to become cyborgs to avoid becoming house cats for vastly more intelligent robots. Now, here we have a roundy garden kind of way of persuading people in this incredibly inverted way. Robots are becoming more, or will become, this is the whole thing of transhumanism, more intelligent than humans, or at least on the 5 sense level. And that's bad, Elon Musk. But to overcome it, to stop them becoming more intelligent than us, don't just stop creating them. What you do is we become them, so we're the same as them, which is exactly what the agenda is for humanity, to fuse humans with machines, so technology controls the whole perception of humans. Musk said that as artificial intelligence advances, people will need to augment their brain power with digital technology to prevent them becoming irrelevant. Snooper's Charter. Should have done this before that. Snooper's Charter. Most Britons unaware of Tory plans. And again, we're back to ignorance. Watching the game shows and the Simon Cowell shows and being totally consumed by sport. Instead of it being an entertainment and a pastime, it becomes a focus. So people miss that this Snooper's Charter is is being introduced by the government. Britons could be sleepwalking into a new era of state surveillance powers, judging by a new poll conducted by civil rights organisation Liberty. Before a Commons battle, House of Commons battle for people around the world, Parliament battle, over the Investigatory Powers Bill, the Snoopers Charter, the poll found that 92% of respondents were unaware of the proposals, described as a Snoopers Charter by critics, disapproved of them, but 72% of respondents said they knew nothing about it. So they don't like it, but they didn't know they didn't like it until someone by chance told them what it was. The two-day Commons report stage of the bill, which will increase the powers of the intelligence services, is scheduled for tomorrow and Tuesday and is the final piece of parliamentary business before the EU referendum is held. So it's another thing. See, the Snoopers Charter, this great increase in surveillance, is being introduced through Parliament while everything is focused on the European referendum. No wonder so many have not heard of it. And here's Elon Musk again. The chance that we are not living in a computer simulation is 1 in billions. And he's talking about the fact that 40 years ago we had Pong, two rectangles, and a dot. That's where we were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously, and it's getting better every year. And soon we'll have virtual reality, we'll have augmented reality. If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality, just indistinguishable, which is what I've been talking about for years. Again, this is a simulation. And I go into this in the talks on the world tour because it's all connected into this whole transhumanist agenda. People listen to the information I'll put forward; they'll see the world in a completely different way in this area alone. Never mind all the other stuff. This elite, of course, know we're in a simulation, and their manipulation is based on manipulating the simulation. But, beyond the simulation, we are consciousness, we are awareness, a state of being aware. We express our awareness currently through this tiny frequency range called visible light. The world we think is a physical world, but isn't. But we are connected. Our base state is awareness, an expression, a point of attention within infinite awareness. And thus, the manipulation of the simulation and the manipulation of our perceptions can silence the influence of that infinite awareness, and we become focused only in five sense reality, simulation reality. But behind all that, everything is consciousness, everything is awareness, everything is alive. And this is an article that came out this week. Trees observed resting their branches. Scientists stunned to realize trees sleep much like people. Using their long, hairy roots, trees absorb water and nutrients from the soil, feeling down into the earth for what they need. Standing tall, soaking in the sun's rays, trees are an image of tremendous strength and beauty, icons of natural intelligence. As they cast shadows and provide shade to the people below, the trees are watching, listening. As people run around, busy in the shadows of the trees, they forget just how important these dynamic living creatures really are. Trees provide oxygen, shelter, companionship, medicine, and tranquility. Trees and people live symbiotically, exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide to maintain balance on Earth. Certain kinds of trees give up their bark, leaves, nuts, fruits, berries, and roots as medicine to people. The similarities between trees and plants and humans are striking when it comes to sharing the basics of life: sun, water, air, and nutrients. Astonishingly, scientists are now starting to see similarities in how trees and people sleep. Using laser beam imaging, Andrea Selinsky of the Center for Ecological Research in Hungary was able to document trees drooping as if they were sleeping at night. At the peak of the night, birch trees in particular were photographed drooping by as much as 10 centimeters at the tips of their branches. It was a very clear effect and applied to the whole tree, said Selinsky. No one has observed this effect before at the scale of whole trees, and I was surprised by the extent of the changes. Between sunset and sunrise, Selinsky and his colleagues used laser beams to scan birch trees in Austria and Finland. The laser technology showed the precise movements of each tree through the night, providing the three-dimensional graphs and resolutions down to the centimeter. The researchers avoided windy nights and measured the trees at the solar equinox in both countries to ensure accuracy in their measurements. In all, the Finnish birch tree was scanned 11 times, once per hour through the night. The Austrian tree was graphed 77 times every 10 minutes through the night. The birch trees appeared to go into a nice relaxed state as the night went on. By morning, as the sun came up, the trees became erect and their branches and leaves appeared to wake up. The phenomenon is more easily recognized in sunflowers, which noticeably droop at night and wake up to face the sun during the day. These studies have only been done in small plants before, but here it was possible to do it outside in fully grown trees. The experiment is the first of its kind. The science behind sleeping trees is linked to water pressure within the plant cells. At night, the process called turgor pressure occurs, where the water pressure drops within the cells. As the process of photosynthesis stops in the dark, turgor pressure kicks in. It means branches and leaf stems are less rigid and more prone to drooping under their own weight, said Selinsky. How about this? The money that is wasted on what we call defense and killing people, defense industries, attack industries, is absolutely staggering. And some of it is extraordinary because it borders on the farcical, how this money is wasted. And so we have this story this week. What a fiasco. Navy's 1 billion warships break down in Gulf because the sea is too hot. Britain's cutting edge £1 billion warships are breaking down in the Persian Gulf because they are not designed for the heat. Well, nor am I, but I don't cost £1 billion. Contractors claim the Ministry of Defence did not tell them that 8,000-ton Type 45 destroyers would be spending a long time in warm waters. But why wouldn't you design them for every eventuality? As a result, the 6 warships have an engine which keeps cutting out in the middle of the sea, leaving servicemen stranded for hours in total darkness. The revelation yesterday raised fears that Britain's key naval assets, designed to shield the rest of the fleet from air or missile attacks, have become sitting ducks. Well, if they're sitting there in complete darkness when nothing can be used, I guess that's pretty much game, set, and match on that conclusion. There were also warnings that troops could be killed as the ships are deployed near combat zones in the Middle East. That's another thing. They're saying here, well, they didn't tell us they'd spend a lot of time in warm waters. Well, where are the conflict zones? Middle East? 4 of the guided missile ships are currently at sea, with one outside Europe and the others in UK waters. Described as the backbone of the Royal Navy, they are fitted with a pioneering new system designed to cut costs and be more fuel efficient. 2 turbines on each ship, made by Rolls-Royce, have intercooler units which recover heat from the exhaust and recycle it into the engine. But a design flaw means the turbines slow down in warm waters and the engine cannot generate enough power. The system does not recognize this and keeps demanding more power, causing the ship's generators to trip out, leading to total electrical failure. And I wonder if there'll be any financial cutback for or consequence for the companies that built them, or any consequences for the Ministry of Defence in terms of personnel that work with them to create this fiasco. Well, the answer will be a massive no, of course. Now, a quick one to finish, because this is something that has really kind of irritated me since they began this wind farm operation. What they've now, these wind turbines all over the place, and what they've now admitted is that belatedly an unexpected and authoritative voice has made it official that they're bloody useless in terms of producing electricity in the way that they should. Not only do they destroy the landscape, beautiful, beautiful areas scarred by these things, and of course the noise for people that live there driving them crazy. This guy, Hugh McNeil, chief executive of the wind industry's trade body, Renewable UK no less, says onshore turbines in England do not add up because there is insufficient wind to keep them turning. There they are, all over the country, destroying beautiful landscapes, and now they say, well, there's not enough wind. I wonder if they could have worked that out beforehand. Maybe they should make frigates ready for the Middle East. All this money, all this nonsense, and there's no consequences for people. Because if what you're doing serves the agenda, for various reasons this does, then you're fine. It's when you do things that don't serve the agenda that you get fired. It says here, we are almost certainly not talking about the possibility of new plants in England, but his punchline is plain enough. The wind speeds don't allow for it. Speechless. See you next week. Bye.